Hey, this is Steve. I go by NoSlice on GitHub and Twitter, and today I'm going to talk to you about Ponzu, an open source content management system and HTTP server framework. So, what is Ponzu? Why does it need to exist? Well, Ponzu is a powerful open source HTTP server framework and CMS that provides helpful content generators, a nice command line interface to create your internal code and generate it really quickly, as well as some tooling to automatically create and renew TLS certificates to get HTTP2 and HTTPS from Let's Encrypt. Ponzu also comes with an automatic JSON HTTP API to get your content out and build modern applications on top of it. Well, Ponzu's filling a void where you might want to reach for WordPress to get a really great CMS or Ruby on Rails to get a rapid development experience, but you really want to just return a fast JSON response from a highly concurrent server. So let's get started. In order to get Ponzu, first you're going to have to install Go, the tooling and the compiler, which are found at golang.org. Click the Download Go button and pick your platform of choice, and then you're off to the races. Next, you're going to want to get Ponzu. In order to get Ponzu, you've got to use the Go tooling, run go get, which is going to install a package from either locally or from a remote source. In this case, you're getting the code from GitHub. So you're going to tell Go you want Ponzu from github.com/ponzu-cms/Ponzu with a slash and 3 dots, which is telling the Go tooling that there is a binary to install inside of this Ponzu project. That binary is the command line interface to generate new projects, your content types, relationships between those content types, and even development and production TLS certificates for HTTP2 and HTTPS. So let's get started. The project we're going to work on is just a really simple bookshelf of sorts. We're going to keep track of the books we own and the authors that those books are written by. So to get started, we need to create this project. So if I do ponzu help new, we can see that the new subcommand creates a Ponzu directory, and by the name that is supplied as a parameter, which is a directory path. And the directory you're creating is always inside your Go path / source directory. So let's try Ponzu new github.com/nilslice, and let's call this bookshelf. Great. So let's check that out. This is the basic directory structure of a Ponzu project that was automatically created for you. We'll get into that in a minute, but first we're going to want to create some content types. And these content types are 99% of the time, you're going to want to generate these from the command line, and it's going to create all the boilerplate code for you, get you started really quickly. So to do that, we're going to use the Ponzu generate content commands, which can be shortened to gen-c. And we're going to create our author, right? So then author is a type, the first parameter. The next is going to be one of its fields. The author's got a name, which is a string in the database. What else does an author have? We're going to give them a photo, which is also going to be a string. It'll be a URL to a resource. And we're going to tell Ponzu to add a file input kind of user interface inside the CMS editor for this author. And that'll make more sense in a second here. And then lastly, we're going to give the author a bio, which also will be a string, but we're going to tell Ponzu to give us a rich text editor for that bio. So let's go ahead and build this by running ponzu build. It's going to compile the project into a binary, as you can see here is Ponzu server. And then ponzu run to start the server up. And you can see running on 8080 /admin to get started. So let's do that. The first thing you got to do is just initialize the system. If you're used to working with something like WordPress, the first thing you do with a new system, give it its name, URLs, things like that. So we've got a project called Bookshelf. It's on localhost. It's an email, and let's give it a password. And there we go. So the Ponzu new generated the project structure, which includes the CMS, the servers, everything you need to kind of get a CMS project up and running that handles all the back-end operations. Our generate command for the author type created its content type here, which we have no authors yet, so let's go ahead and make one. We see our name field as a text input, the photo, which is an upload, and a rich text editor for our bio. So let's just pretend that I am an author here and create an item for me. Let's just say something about Steve. Great. Cool, so we have our first author in the system, but I don't like how this is displayed there. So we're going to go ahead and change that. Let's open up a code editor for the Bookshelf project. And that's the wrong one. Inside our content directory, you'll see an author.go file that's been generated for us. You can see our author type, the struct with these fields. The name, photo, bio all have their corresponding JSON struct tags added. And a method on the author called Marshall Editor, which is a thing that turns the struct into a content editor within the CMS. So you see there are fields here, each containing a view, which in this case is the standard input for a name, editor, file input for our photo, and editor.rich text for our bio. These things, again, were all generated for you automatically using the command line interface. So to go and change that ugly string into something that's more useful, we're going to add a string method with which Ponzu uses to figure out how to display this particular type or any content type in the system. And we just want to return the author's name. If you're familiar with Go, you'll know that the string method is commonly used to override how like a formatting is made for any kind of type. So we're using the same thing here. This is implementing the stringer interface. Let's go ahead and build this again and run it once more to see how that change affected the system. So I'll refresh, and there we go. Now our author name is what's used as the listing display for our author types. Now we want to make a book. So we're going to go back into the CLI here, and in order to make a book, we want it to have less of a flat structure. So we want to actually have a reference to an author for each book, because each book is written by an author. And in order to do that, there's one other kind of new bit of syntax. We're going to start off the same way, Ponzu Gen C book, which is going to have a title. That's a string. When it comes to the author, the field name can be whatever you'd like, author, written by. But when it comes to determining what the reference is, you're going to use an @ symbol and the actual name of the type that you typed in into the CLI to create that author. So author. And then just like we updated the string method to change the display name, we got to give an author a display kind of value as well, and we're going to use its name field. So you can have, if you wanted to get more descriptive and an author had more fields, you could pass any number of things here, comma separated, just like that. Author's also going to have, a book is also going to have, a page count, so pages, the year it was published. Both of those are ints. And then maybe we want to do some number of photos for every book. Maybe I want to take a picture of the front and the back cover, from a different angle, some interior pages, just to kind of document what this book looks like. you can have an arbitrary number of kind of repeatable inputs for a field. So we're going to call this photos. It's going to be a slice of strings, again, because these are going to be a file upload. It's got to be wrapped in quotes because the kind of glob, the brackets in Bash are globs and you'd get an error, so just make sure you put slices in quotes like that. And then again, we're going to make this a file. You'll notice something cool happens here when we build and run this one. Keep in mind, for photos, we gave it a slice type and still gave it the file which we saw on the author, which generated the file input. When we go into the CMS and check our book, you'll notice we now have a file upload, but it has this little repeat controller. So I can add any number of files I want here. So let's go ahead and create a book. Let's just call this a book. And it's written by me. And it's got 200 pages. And it saves in 2017. Let's go ahead and use some photos here. Great. Created our book, the title, pages, author. Awesome. So, oops, let's use a different photo. Let's go with this one. Cool. So, how do we get this content out of the system now? We've figured out how to create types. We've figured out how to add content. But how do we get content out? Well, Ponzu has a number of different API endpoints, which are documented here, docs.ponzu-cms.org. And in the content API, you'll find these different endpoints. You've got the content by type, which returns a single content item from the system, and that's at API content/type. Type equals type, and ID equals ID. So let's just try this out here. We're going to work with our book type, and we only have one in, so I know it's ID1. And there we have it. Here's our response for our book of ID1. If we wanted to, we could also get all the books out. By default, it will return 10 at a time. We only have one, so that's all it's going to come back at us. Oops. So our book, you can see here, sorry, there's a cached version from an earlier attempt, but we've got an ID, a slug, a timestamp, updated time, our title, our pages, year, the photo URLs, and then our author, which is a URL path reference. It's not just an ID, it keeps more information in there, so it's a little bit easier when you're building a client to kind of parse through the JSON response, find the author, and then make that secondary request to get that author. And you can see, I'll just change this to author ID1, and there we go. We've got me, my photo, and my bio. Well, if you're watching and you're paying attention, you'll notice that I had to make a second HTTP request just to get kind of a reference item. And in some cases, if you've got a lot of items and you're making a lot of references, that's going to add up to a lot of HTTP calls. So instead of worrying about how am I going to make this more efficient, I'm going to show you how to add another interface, the Pushable interface from the system item package, which will automatically incorporate HTTP2 server push, which you can tell the server to preemptively push to the client, assuming the client will allow it, preemptively push resources that are from the server along with the initial response. So for your book, we want to also push down that author so that we don't have to make two requests for a book and its corresponding author. So in our book, we are going to add a push method, which is going to return a slice of strings. And this slice of strings is going to represent all of the fields from our book type that we want to push down. So in this case, we want to push our author type down. So we're going to use the JSON field, the struct value here, the struct tag, and maybe we also want to push down our photos, because those are the same origin. So we want to push our author, we want to push our photos. Okay, so let's build that and run it again. But this time when we run it, in order to get HTTP2, which is a requirement for server push, we need to use HTTPS. And in Ponzu, to turn on HTTPS, when you're in development, you pass the dev HTTP S flag, just like that. Oops, sorry. Run. So what it does in the background is it generates self-signed certificates, loads them into the project, and then starts up a TLS server listening at localhost 10.4.4.3. If you're on Chrome, you're going to get an error the first time you do this, so just look in the console and it gives you instructions to visit Chrome flags allowing secure localhost to get rid of that message, and it will work fine. So now let's redo this request here, but over HTTPS. And you notice nothing really changes, which is expected. However, when we go and want to look at one of our requests we would normally have to make a follow-on HTTP call for, you'll see that it was initiated by push, which means that this request, the response for it, has already been sent down to our server. We've already got it here. And you can see here that the only thing spent time doing was just reading it from the push, which is just in memory here in the browser, ready for us to read once that request has been made, but there's been no round trip actually sent to the server. The same thing is true for these photos. So if I go and check one out, I'll notice that there it is. The server has already sent this image down along with that response for the book. So it's ready for us to access as if it was embedded in that book JSON response itself. That's pretty cool. And all you had to do was implement the Pushable interface by adding a single method, returning the JSON struct tag names for the fields of the type you want information returned from. So let's go back into the CMS itself, and I'll give you a cool little look around of what else we've got here. You notice now that this is a graph showing us how many requests have been made for resources through the APIs, which will give you a kind of 2-week rolling window into the activity on your system. So along with our content, which you've already seen, we've got some system options. You can check the add-ons that are installed. You can check out all the file uploads. You can see admin users, create and remove new people to log into your system. And then most importantly, the system's configuration itself. If I want to change the name here, I can do so here. If I want to change the domain and use my domain to get a live SSL certificate, once I'm up on a remote host, I can change the domain name here. Change my admin email. Other things that are pretty neat is I can change some server configurations that you might need to typically shut your server down or live or hot reload your Nginx or Apache conf files. So things like cores, things like gzip and HTTP cache settings, all can be done at runtime from your configuration. And then things like you can download database backups over HTTP only if you used, if you've added a basic auth user and password combination here, and that's all in the documentation as well. So we've gone over how to create content and set up a new system. We've gone over how to add content to the system. We've gone over how to get content from the system and then optimize it for HTTP2 using server push and the pushable interface. But what if we want to make our server more interactive with outside clients? What if we want to get, maybe we want to make an iPhone app that can send a book and an author or whatever to our CMS? That we can do also by implementing an interface called Create. And in Ponzu, we've got a bunch of these different interfaces. separated by kind of their package. So the API interfaces have creatable and updatable and deletable. And these different interfaces extend the functionality of your content types so that an outside API call could, as long as it's formatted correctly, can send data in, like you're submitting a form, and create content from outside parties. And then, the handlers know how to treat that content and save it, and you have a lot of flexibility in what you can do in there. So let's go ahead and allow third-party API clients to add a book to our content. We'll go back to our book.go file, and on our book, we're going to add a create method. All of these, or most of these interfaces follow the same function signature. You've got a HTTP response writer and a request that returns an error. So in this create method, you may normally want to add some validation or some authentication, check for things that are on the request, like a token or an authorization header, validate the data, and in this case, we're just going to kind of let it happen and let the content from outside sources just come through and be saved to the system. But not all content just by default gets pumped right into your system and then published through the API. You also need to approve content, and you could do it manually so that whenever a submission comes in, it gets stashed into kind of a pending area, and that's done by adding an approve method to this, which follows the same function signature. So let's copy, because why not? You can also do some validation here if you'd like to, but for demonstration purposes, we're not going to do that. Let's go ahead and build and run this, see what happens. So we look at our book types here. I should have changed our string method on this one as well, but I'll go ahead and do that anyways. So I'm going to go and implement the stringer the interface here so that I can tell what's been added. Let's go by our book title, and maybe we also want to give it our author. So I'm going to return the title, and actually let's just do the year because that's just easier. And I guess we can format it better. Okay. There we go. So a book from 2017. Now, remember, we were creating items and then manually approving them. So you'll notice in this book type, there's a status with a toggle, public or pending, which is not on our author because we can't create authors from outside clients. This pending section, there's nothing there. But let's go ahead and create a book from our API client. I'm just going to use Postman, which is a client for kind of testing and such. I've pre-filled these values, but you'll notice that the encoding has to be form data, a multi-part form posted to our server. If it's not following that same configuration, the post will fail, and you'll get a 400 bad request response back. So we've got a title, API client created this book, our author, which is the URL path to our author type, number of pages, and the year. our response type comes back and it says, hey, we've got data. Status is pending for that type book you just sent me. And that informs us that we go here, and now I've got that book that the API client created. You'll notice that this now has a box with a reject or an approve option. Rejecting will just delete this. Approving will push it into our public kind of collection, which will then make this book accessible from the API. Also in the documentation, there are before and after reject and approve kind of hooks inside the item.hookable interface, which you can hook into and send an email or do something on either of these actions. So we'll go ahead and approve it. And there we go. Now it's in my book with ID 2. If I go back to book, in my pending, there's nothing. It has been moved, and it is now the latest book in my collection. And if we go back to 8080 on HTTP2, and let's get all of our books out, you can see we now have 2 books in the public API. The one from our client and the one we made from the CMS. Cool. If we wanted to skip the process of manually approving these things, we can implement another interface, which is called Trustable, and it has a method called auto approve. And if you implement auto approve, anything that's sent to you from an outside client is just going to be automatically pushed into that public API, which we don't need to demonstrate. That is pretty much it. We've got a number of other interfaces that we could implement, like updatable if I wanted other clients to be able to update this content, deletable if we wanted clients to be able to delete that content, a bunch of different interfaces in the item package. You can get full text search for any of your content types, which is another single method interface. Just to implement it, there's a second method in the searchable interface that allow you to create your own kind of mapping. If you're unfamiliar with this, check out Blevy, which is the search engine that we use in Ponzu. Fantastic library, and you'll learn a lot about search and how content is indexed. If you want to turn it on, it's off for all of your types by default because you could have sensitive data. You don't want it exported into the search API. But check out the documentation. There's a lot more to Ponzu, but just in that little bit, you should have enough to create some really cool stuff. If you have questions or issues, you could reach out to me on Twitter, either at Ponzu_CMS or on GitHub. Ponzu-CMS/Ponzu, and open an issue, and somebody will be happy to help you. All right, cool. Thanks, guys.